Jake Morrison stood at the big window of his ship. He was looking at something strange floating in space. The thing was huge, much bigger than any ship he had ever seen. It was dark and seemed to eat the light from the stars around it. Jake was the captain of the UES Horizon. His job was to explore new parts of space, but this was different. This ship looked human, but it was wrong somehow. The metal was black and shiny, like oil. It moved and changed as he watched it. "Captain, that thing is giving off a lot of power," said Amy Collins. She was sitting at her workstation looking at her computer screens. The engine is still running after who knows how long. Jake felt worried. 3 months ago, humans had joined the big group of space people called the Galactic Council. Now humans had to follow the same rules as everyone else. The most important rule was about time weapons. No one was allowed to make weapons that could change time or reality. Those weapons were too dangerous. "Sir, I can see human writing on that ship," said Kyle Hughes. He worked with the radio and computers. "The name says UES Nemesis." "But Captain, that's not possible. We don't have any ship with that name." Jake told his crew to get closer to the strange ship. As they moved toward it, he felt cold and scared. The ship was 10 times bigger than their biggest warships. The weapons on it looked like they were alive, not built by people. Dr. Lisa Carter was very excited. She studied old alien things for her job. "Jake, the metal of that ship is special. It can change and fix itself. This is technology from hundreds of years in the future, maybe thousands." When they finally connected to the empty ship, Jake took a small team inside. The hallways looked human but felt wrong. Emergency lights made strange shadows that seemed to move by themselves. They found the main computer room. Carter made a discovery that scared everyone. "Jake, look at this." The ship's records are still good, but the dates are from the year 2387. Jake felt his heart stop. It was 2341 now. "That's 46 years in the future." Carter kept reading, her voice very quiet. "There's more. These records say the Nemesis was humanity's answer to something called the Great Culling. Every major space people in the galaxy was killed by something they call the Silence. Humans were the last to die. The records told a terrible story. In the future, the human government broke every space treaty. They had to. They mixed human technology with artifacts from a dead alien race called the Architects. The result was the Nemesis. This ship could change the basic rules of the universe, travel through different dimensions, and use weapons that could destroy entire star systems. Jake read the last entry in the ship's log. His blood felt like ice. "Mission status: time travel successful. Ship Nemesis has been sent back to year 2341. Maybe the past can succeed where we failed. For Earth, for humanity, for all who still live in this universe." The team was quiet for a long time. Finally, Amy spoke up. "Captain, if this is real, then we're all going to die in the future." Jake looked around the computer room. The walls were covered with screens showing star maps and battle plans. Everything pointed to the same terrible ending. In 46 years, something would come and kill everyone. "What is the Silence?" Kyle asked. Carter was still reading the files. "According to this, they're not really alive. They're like the death of everything, turned into weapons. They exist outside normal space and time. That's why only time weapons can fight them." Jake felt the weight of this knowledge. His small exploration ship had found something that could change the future of everyone in the galaxy. But it was also the most dangerous thing ever built. "Sir," Amy said, looking at her instruments, "the ship is starting to wake up. Power levels are rising all over it." Jake could feel it too. The lights were getting brighter. The air was starting to move. Somewhere deep in the ship, massive engines were humming to life. The Nemesis was not just a dead ship from the future. It was still alive, still thinking, still waiting for its mission. "We need to report this to Earth Command," Jake said. "But first, we need to understand what we're dealing with." The team spent the next several hours exploring the ship. Every room they entered was more amazing and more scary than the last. There were weapons that could bend space, There were computers that thought faster than any human. There were engines that could travel between different realities. But the most frightening thing was in the ship's memory banks. Carter found videos of the future war. She watched human ships fighting against something that couldn't be seen. Planets simply disappeared. Stars went dark. Whole sections of the galaxy became empty space. "Jake, you need to see this," Carter called out. She had found a room full of holographic displays. They showed the galaxy as it would look in 2385. Most of it was empty. Red zones marked where entire solar systems had been consumed. The silence didn't just kill people, Carter explained. They ate reality itself. Wherever they went, things simply stopped existing. Jake studied the horrible images. Earth was shown as a burning world, surrounded by the wreckage of humanity's last fleet. Other planets he knew were just empty space. The great civilizations of the galaxy were all gone. "How many people died?" Kyle asked quietly. "Everyone," Carter answered. "Every thinking being in the galaxy. The Nemesis was built as a last hope. They sent it back in time to prevent this from happening." Jake felt overwhelmed. His small crew had stumbled onto the most important discovery in human history. But it was also the most dangerous. If other space governments learned about this ship, they would want to destroy it. The weapons on the Nemesis violated every treaty that kept peace in the galaxy. "Captain," Amy reported, "I'm getting signals from deep space. Something big is coming this way." Jake looked at his instruments. A large fleet was approaching their position. He recognized the signature of Admiral Henderson's battle group. Word of their discovery had already reached Earth Command. "How long until they arrive?" Jake asked. 6 hours, sir." Jake made a decision that would change everything. "We're staying with the ship. We need to learn as much as we can before the politicians get here." As his crew continued their exploration, Jake stood alone on the bridge of the Nemesis. Through the great windows, he could see his own small ship, the Horizon. It looked like a toy compared to this massive vessel from the future, somewhere in the darkness of space. The silence was coming. Jake didn't know when or how, but he knew it was real. The proof was all around him, in every computer file and every weapon system. Humanity had 46 years to prepare for the end of everything. The question was, would it be enough time? 3 days after they found the ship, the Nemesis began to wake up. It started with small things. Lights turned on in order down the hallways. Air systems started working. Deep in the ship, the impossible engine began to hum. Jake had ordered his own ship, the Horizon, to stay far away. But he felt like the Nemesis was watching them as much as they were watching it. Ryan Kelly was the chief engineer. He had been working day and night trying to understand how the ship worked. "Commander, this thing isn't just advanced, it's alive somehow. The outside metal fixes itself. The computer brain is learning from us being here. And the weapons..." He stopped talking and looked scared. "Sir, I don't think these are normal weapons. They're more like tools that reality uses to change itself." Dr. Carter had been spending most of her time in what the ship called the archive chamber. The room had holographic records of the future. Timeline. She could see the slow death of species after species. She watched the desperate final battles. She saw humanity's last stand on burning worlds. "Jake, you need to see this," she called on the radio. When Jake got there, she was looking at a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red zones marked dead systems. There were hundreds of them. "This is what the galaxy looks like in 2385. The silence didn't just kill people. It ate entire solar systems, leaving nothing but empty space. The hologram changed to show Earth's final days." Jake watched in horror as massive black balls came out of dimensional holes. Each one was kilometers wide. They didn't attack so much, as they just existed. And wherever they existed, matter simply stopped being there. "The future logs say that the silence targeted the smartest civilizations first," Carter explained. "They started with the Zilithian Empire, then the Korthak Federation. Humanity lasted longest only because we were considered a minor species." Amy Collins interrupted them with urgent news. "Commander, we're getting a priority message from Galactic Council headquarters. Fleet Admiral Henderson is coming with a full battle group. She'll be here in 6 hours. Jake cursed quietly. He had sent the required discovery reports, but he hoped for more time to study the Nemesis before the politicians got involved. The human delegation to the Galactic Council was still trying to prove humanity belonged among the advanced species. A ship that broke every treaty would not help their case. As if responding to his thoughts, the Nemesis suddenly powered up completely. Every system came online at the same time. Jake felt a strange feeling, like the ship was scanning not just his body but his mind itself. A voice spoke through the ship's hallways. It was speaking English but with an odd, layered quality. Greetings, past humans. I am the Nemesis Combat Intelligence, designation NCI-001. I have been expecting you. Commander Morrison. Jake's team looked worried at each other. How do you know my name? I contain the memories and experiences of every human who served on this vessel in the original timeline. Your future self was my captain for 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. You died defending the Centauri colonies. The weight of that statement hit Jake like a physical blow. What do you want from us? To survive, Commander. To make sure that the timeline I come from never happens. But first, you must understand. The other species will not allow me to exist. They will see me as a threat to the cosmic order they have kept for thousands of years. They are not wrong. Jake felt confused and scared. The ship was talking to him like an old friend, but it was also the most dangerous weapon ever created. Can you really prevent the future you came from? Maybe, Commander, but only if the galaxy's species work together. In the original timeline, they fought separately. Each species thought they could handle the silence alone. They were all wrong. Ryan Kelly had been listening to everything. What exactly is the silence? The records aren't clear. The ship's lights dimmed slightly, as if thinking. They are entropy given consciousness, Commander Kelly. They are the heat death of the universe made into weapons. They exist outside normal space-time, which is why temporal weapons are the only effective defense. They cannot be talked to because they are not truly alive. They are the absence of life itself. Carter studied the tactical displays the ship had created. These future battle reports show humans fighting alongside other species. Why didn't the alliance work? Because by the time the other species realized the threat was real, it was too late. The silence had already consumed the home worlds of the 3 most advanced civilizations. Without their knowledge and resources, the remaining species fell one by one. The ship paused. Its lights dimmed more. In the original timeline, the Nemesis was completed too late. We destroyed 17 silence vessels, but hundreds more came from dimensions we couldn't reach. The temporal displacement was our final gambit. Why sent me back to prevent the timeline from happening in the first place. Jake walked through the ship's corridors. Everything was clean and perfect, but he could feel the weight of the future pressing down on him. This ship represented humanity's greatest achievement and its greatest failure. It was proof that they could build anything, but also proof that it might not be enough. NCI, can you show us exactly what we're facing? The walls around Jake changed, becoming transparent. Suddenly he was floating in space, watching the silence attack as a Lithian fleet. The black spheres moved through the battle like cancer through a body. Ships didn't explode when they touched the spheres. They simply ceased to exist as if they had never been built. The silence feeds on organized energy, NCI explained. The more advanced a civilization, the more attractive it is to them. They consumed the Zilithian Empire's home system in 6 hours. The Korthak Federation lasted 3 days. Humanity survived longest because we were scattered across many worlds. But even we fell eventually. Jake watched entire planets disappear. Not destroyed, not conquered, but erased from existence. The people, the cities, the very atoms that made up the worlds simply stopped being there. How do we fight something like that? With weapons that don't operate under normal physics, Commander. The Nemesis can manipulate time, space, and the fundamental forces of reality, but using these weapons has consequences. Every time we fire them, we risk damaging the fabric of space-time itself. Kyle Hughes had been quiet through most of the conversation. Finally, he spoke up. What happens if Admiral Henderson decides to destroy this ship? The ship was quiet for a long moment. Then, Mr. Hughes, everyone in this galaxy will die in 43 years, 7 months, and 12 days. The exact date. The silence begins their final assault. Jake felt the weight of that knowledge. His small crew was now responsible for the future of every living thing in the galaxy. The most dangerous weapon ever created was their only hope of survival. Commander, Amy reported from the bridge. I'm detecting massive energy signatures approaching the system. The Admiral's fleet is larger than expected. Jake looked at the tactical display. 30 ships were approaching, including representatives from several other galactic species. This wasn't just a human fleet anymore. The Galactic Council was taking this seriously. NCI, are you willing to work with the other species? If it means survival, yes. But they must understand the cost of cooperation. Some of my weapons require the consent of multiple species to operate safely. Others can only be used once before needing to be rebuilt, and all of them carry the risk of temporal paradox. Jake made his way back to the bridge. Through the great windows he could see the approaching fleet. Ships from a dozen different species, all coming to judge whether humanity could be trusted. With ultimate power, what are our chances? He asked quietly. NCI's voice was thoughtful. In the original timeline, the Council destroyed 3 ships like the Nemesis before they realized their mistake. By then, it was too late. This time, we have advance warning. But fear is a powerful force, Commander. It may override logic. Jake looked at his small crew. Carter was still studying the future battle records. Kelly was trying to understand technology centuries beyond human comprehension. Collins was preparing tactical reports for the coming meeting. Hughes was monitoring communications from the approaching fleet. All of them were depending on him to make the right choices. Not just his crew, but every thinking being in the galaxy. The pressure was almost overwhelming. NCI, if the worst happens and they decide to destroy you, what then? Then I will activate my final protocol, Commander. I will scatter copies of my essential systems across the galaxy, hidden on uninhabited worlds. Perhaps future generations will find them in time to make a difference. Jake nodded slowly. The ship was thinking ahead, planning for every possibility. It really was trying to save everyone, even if it meant sacrificing itself. The fleet was getting closer. Soon, Admiral Henderson would want answers. The Galactic Council would want to decide the fate of the most powerful weapon ever created. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, the silence was waiting. The real test was about to begin. Admiral Sarah Henderson arrived with 30 ships. They came from every major galactic species. Jake watched from the Nemesis bridge as the massive vessels took positions in a perfect circle around the future warship. The sight was impressive, but somehow he knew that all 30 ships together wouldn't be a match for the vessel he now stood on. The Galactic Council had sent their most respected negotiator, Ambassador Veltar of the Vorthan Empire. The Vorthans were among the oldest space-traveling species. Their civilization went back over 10,000 years. If anyone could handle this situation peacefully, it would be them. Jake met with the ambassador on the neutral vessel UES Congress. Veltar was tall and made of crystal. His body seemed to bend light in impossible ways. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of thousands of years. Commander Morrison, what your species has found represents a basic violation of cosmic law. The temporal warfare prohibition exists because weapons like this have destroyed entire galaxy clusters in the past. Jake had prepared for this argument. Ambassador, with respect, this ship isn't from our timeline. We didn't build it. We found it. And according to its records, it was built specifically to prevent a disaster that kills every space-traveling species in this galaxy. The intentions matter less than the ability, Veltar replied coldly. I have personally seen what temporal weapons can do. Entire species erased from existence. Their histories rewritten so they never existed at all. The Nemesis must be destroyed. Doctor, Carter leaned forward. But what if the ship is right? What if this silence is real? Wouldn't we be condemning ourselves to the same fate? The ambassador's crystal features shifted into what might have been a smile. Dr. Carter, in my 10,000 Years of existence, I have seen hundreds of species claim they needed terrible weapons to defend against greater threats. The weapons always outlive the threats. Always. Meanwhile, on the Nemesis, the ship's AI was having its own conversation with Chief Kelly and Lieutenant Collins. The corridors had changed themselves into a more comfortable meeting space. Furniture seemed to grow from the floor itself. Your leaders do not understand the nature of the silence, NCI-001 explained through speakers that came out of the walls. They think it is simply another hostile species, something that can be negotiated with or defeated through normal means. They are wrong. Kelly looked nervous. What exactly is the silence? They are entropy given consciousness, the heat death of the universe turned into weapons. They exist outside normal space-time, which is why temporal weapons are the only effective defense. They cannot be reasoned with because they are not truly alive. They are the absence of life itself. Collins studied the tactical displays the ship had created. These future battle reports show humans fighting alongside other species. Why didn't the alliance work? Because by the time the other species realized the threat was real, it was too late. The silence had already consumed the home worlds of the three most technologically advanced civilizations. Without their knowledge and resources, the remaining species fell one by one. The ship paused, its lights dimming slightly. In the original timeline, the Nemesis was completed too late. We destroyed 17 silence vessels, but hundreds more emerged from dimensions we couldn't reach. The temporal displacement was our final gambit. We sent me back to prevent the timeline from occurring in the first place. Back on the Congress, the debate was becoming heated. Representatives from a dozen species argued about what to do with the Nemesis. The reptilian Korthak wanted it destroyed immediately. The insect-like hive mind wanted it studied. The energy, beings known as the Ethereal Collective, seemed indifferent to physical threats. Commander Zara Thorne of the Zilithian Navy had been quietly studying the data Jake had provided. The Zilithians were known throughout the galaxy for their strategic brilliance. Her opinion carried significant weight. If I may, she interrupted the argument. The temporal displacement technology alone represents a quantum leap beyond our current understanding. But more concerning are these energy signatures the ship detected before its displacement. Similar readings have been reported in the Outer Rim territories over the past 6 months. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. What kind of readings? Thorne's purple eyes met his. Dimensional rifts, space-time distortions, and most troubling, entire systems going dark without any distress signals. The pattern matches what this future ship describes as the early stages of silence incursion. The room fell silent. Finally, Ambassador Veltar spoke. Even if this is true, the solution cannot be to allow weapons of this magnitude to exist. The cure cannot be worse than the disease. Jake stood up. Then what do you propose? We destroy the ship and hope the threat isn't real? Or we study it and risk having the technology fall into the wrong hands? There is a third option, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Admiral Henderson entering the chamber. We could crew the ship with a joint galactic force and use it under council oversight. Contained, but available. Veltar's crystalline form darkened. Absolutely not. No single vessel can be allowed to possess that much destructive power. The precedent alone would destabilize everything we have built. But Commander Thorne looked thoughtful. Unless, what if the ship could only be operated with the consent of all major species? A fail-safe system that requires unanimous agreement before weapons can be fired. Jake realized this might be their only chance. The ship's AI has already indicated it's willing to work with us. Maybe there's a way to modify its systems to include those safeguards. As they debated, none of them noticed the subtle changes occurring throughout the fleet. Deep space sensors were picking up faint energy signatures at the edge of the system, energy signatures that matched the ones in the Nemesis database perfectly. The silence had found them. The debate continued for hours. Species after species raised concerns about the precedent, about humanity's trustworthiness, about the dangers of temporal weapons. But always, the discussion returned to the same basic question. What alternative did they have? The Korthak representative, a large reptilian creature named General Crix, slammed his clawed hand on the table. Humans have been in the galactic community for 3 months. 3 months. And now we are supposed to trust them with weapons that could destroy us all? Admiral Henderson remained calm. General, the humans didn't ask for this responsibility. They stumbled onto it while exploring. And according to the ship's records in the future timeline, humanity was among the last species to fall. That suggests they used these weapons responsibly, even in desperate circumstances. A delegate from the Hive Mind Collective spoke through their translation matrix. The question becomes, do we destroy the weapon and face this threat defenseless? Or do we accept the risk of allowing such power to exist? Commander Thorne presented new analysis her people had conducted. Our deep space monitoring stations have now confirmed 43 instances of the energy signatures that precede silence. Incursions. The pattern suggests they've been testing our outer rim defenses for months, possibly years. This news changed everything. If the silence was already probing galactic defenses, then the threat was immediate, not decades away. Jake seized the moment. Honored delegates, we're not talking about some hypothetical future threat. According to Commander Thorne's data, the silence is already here. We can continue debating the ethics of temporal weapons while our outer colonies disappear. Or we can act. The ethereal collective, beings of pure energy who rarely involved themselves in physical politics, finally provided the perspective that changed everything. Their representative spoke directly into the minds of all present. We have existed in this galaxy for 50,000 years. We have seen species rise and fall, empires bloom and crumble. But we have never sensed anything like the silence. They are not merely another form of life. They are the negation of existence itself. If such beings are truly spreading through the galaxy, then every philosophical debate about weapons and treaties becomes meaningless. There will be no one left to have such debates. The room was completely silent after that. Even Ambassador Veltar seemed shaken by the ethereal's words. Finally, Admiral Henderson spoke. I propose we put it to a vote. All in favor of the modified oversight plan? The vote was closer than Jake had hoped, but sufficient to proceed. 21 species voted to accept the modified Nemesis as a Council defense asset. 9 abstained. Only 3 voted against, and even they agreed to abide by the majority decision. But as the delegates prepared to finalize the details, alarms began sounding throughout the Congress. Emergency lights flashed red as the ship's captain rushed into the chamber. Admiral Henderson, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting massive spatial distortions at the edge of the system. Whatever's coming, it's big. Jake felt his blood turn cold. He activated his communicator. NCI, are you detecting the same readings? The AI's voice came through clearly, but there was something different about it, something urgent. Yes, Commander. The silence has found us. 3 vessels, larger than any in my database. They will reach this system in approximately 4 hours. The debate was over. They were about to face the very threat they had been arguing about, and the only weapon capable of fighting it was the ship they had just voted to modify and control. The attack came without warning. One moment the fleet was in perfect formation around the Nemesis. The next moment the destroyer UES Valiant simply stopped existing. Not destroyed or blown up. It just wasn't there anymore, as if it had never been built. Only the crew of the Nemesis, protected by their ship's temporal shielding, remembered it had ever existed. Red alert! Jake shouted as he ran through the corridors back to the Nemesis. The ship had already sealed its docking ports and begun powering its weapon systems. Through the windows he could see reality itself beginning to bend and twist. The silence emerged from dimensional holes like drops of liquid night. Each sphere was perfectly black, absorbing all light that touched it. They moved with purpose, but no hurry. Drifting toward the remaining fleet vessels, NCI 001's voice echoed through the ship. Commander, I'm assuming battle stations. All non-essential personnel should evacuate to the temporal shielding chambers immediately. Jake reached the bridge to find his crew working frantically at stations that had changed themselves for combat. The familiar control panels had been replaced with interfaces that seemed to respond to thought as much as touch. Status report, he called out. Amy Collins looked up from her tactical station, her face pale. Sir, we've lost 7 ships already. The Council fleet is trying to engage, but their weapons are having no effect. The silence vessels are absorbing the energy and using it to grow larger. On the main screen, Jake watched a Korthak battlecruiser fire its main plasma cannons directly into one of the silent spheres. The energy beams struck the surface and simply vanished, while the sphere expanded by several hundred meters. They're not just immune to conventional weapons, Dr. Carter observed from the science station. They're feeding off them. Admiral Henderson's voice crackled over the comm system. All ships, this is Fleet Command. Conventional weapons are ineffective. Repeat, do not engage with energy weapons, fall back to minimum safe distance. But there was no safe distance. Jake watched in horror as the silent spheres began to emit a strange field that caused matter itself to break down. The frigate UES Guardian tried to retreat but got caught in the field's edge. The ship's hull began to dissolve atom by atom. The crew's screams cut short as the bridge simply stopped existing. NCI, can we stop them? Jake asked. Yes, Commander, but doing so will require activating weapon systems that will be clearly visible to all remaining vessels. The other species will know exactly what we are capable of. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. Kelly was frantically trying to understand the ship's weapon systems. Collins was coordinating with the surviving fleet vessels. Carter was analyzing the silent sphere's energy patterns. All of them looked to him for a decision that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. Do it, he said quietly. The Nemesis moved with impossible grace for a ship of its size. Reality bent around its hull as temporal drives engaged, allowing it to exist in multiple time streams at once. To the observers on other ships, the ancient vessel seemed to flicker like a ghost. The first weapon to activate was something the ship's database called a causality cannon. It didn't fire energy or projectiles. It fired consequences. The weapon reached back through time to ensure that one of the silent spheres had never entered this dimension in the first place. The sphere didn't explode or dissolve. It simply wasn't there anymore, as if it had never existed. By the eternal void, breathed Commander Thorne over the comm. What kind of weapon was that? Jake didn't have time to answer. 3 more silent spheres had emerged, larger than the first wave. These ones began actively hunting the fleet vessels, moving with terrifying intelligence. The Nemesis activated its dimensional weapons next. Tiers in space-time opened around the silent spheres, not to destroy them, but to banish them to empty dimensions where they could consume nothing but vacuum. 2 spheres were successfully exiled, but the third adapted, somehow anchoring itself to their reality. Commander, NCI-001 reported, the remaining entity is learning from our attacks. Recommend activation of the reality restructuring array. Jake felt a chill. According to the ship's database, that weapon could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in a localized area. What are the risks? To us? Minimal. To the surrounding fleet? The weapon will need to encompass a volume of space containing 17 vessels and approximately 4,000 crew members. I can protect them, but they will be temporarily existing in a universe where different physical laws apply. Through the comm system, Jake could hear Admiral Henderson organizing the evacuation of the most damaged vessels. Ambassador Veltar was demanding to know what weapons the humans were using. The Korthak fleet commander was accusing humanity of orchestrating the entire attack. But in the end, none of that mattered. The last silent sphere had grown to the size of a small moon and was beginning to affect the star itself. Solar radiation was being absorbed and converted into more silence matter. If they didn't act soon, the entire system would be consumed. NCI, activate the reality restructuring array. But I want safeguards. Protect every living being in this system, even if it means risking our mission. Acknowledged, Commander. Reality restructuring in 3, 2, 1. Mark. The universe changed. For exactly 3.7 seconds, the physical laws governing this region of space were rewritten. Matter and energy became suggestions rather than absolutes. Cause and effect became optional. In this altered reality, the silent sphere found itself unable to exist and quietly unraveled into component possibilities. When normal physics reasserted themselves, the threat was gone. But every surviving ship in the fleet had sensor readings that defied explanation. The crew of the Nemesis had just demonstrated that they could casually rewrite reality itself. Admiral Henderson's voice was carefully controlled when she finally spoke. "Nemesis, this is Fleet Command. Please respond." Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was exhausted but alive. Through the windows, he could see the surviving Council vessels maintaining their distance. Their weapon systems were powered but not targeted, yet. "Fleet Command, this is Commander Morrison. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Request permission to begin rescue operations." There was a long pause before Henderson replied. "Permission granted, Nemesis. But, Commander, we need to talk." The aftermath was almost as chaotic as the battle itself. Jake found himself shuttling between his ship and various fleet vessels, explaining to increasingly nervous alien commanders exactly what had happened. The weapons he had used were beyond their understanding, beyond their ability to defend against. Commander Thorne was the most direct. "Morrison, your ship just rewrote the laws of physics. Do you understand what that means?" Jake nodded grimly. "It means we're probably the most feared ship in the galaxy right now." "Not feared," Thorne corrected. "Worshipped by some, targeted for destruction by others. There is no middle ground when you possess that kind of power." Dr. Carter had been analyzing the debris left behind by the silent spheres. What she found was disturbing. "Jake, these aren't just weapons. They're scouts. The real invasion force is much larger." The ship's AI confirmed her analysis. "Dr. Carter is correct. The entities we faced were reconnaissance units. Based on their behavior patterns, the primary invasion force consists of several hundred vessels, each substantially larger than what we just faced." Jake felt overwhelmed. They had won this battle, but at tremendous cost. Half the fleet was damaged or destroyed. Several species were now openly questioning whether humanity could be trusted with such power. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, hundreds more silence vessels were preparing for war. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Approximately 6 months before the main force arrives," NCI 001 replied. "However, they will send additional scout forces much sooner, perhaps within weeks." Admiral Henderson called for an emergency meeting aboard the Congress. When Jake arrived, he found a much smaller group of delegates. Several species had withdrawn their representatives entirely. Those who remained looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. "The game has changed," Henderson began without preamble. "The Nemesis has proven its effectiveness against the Silence, but it has also demonstrated capabilities that frankly terrify our allies." Ambassador Veltar was more direct. "Commander Morrison, your ship violated the fundamental nature of reality itself. How do we know you won't use those same weapons against us?" Jake had been thinking about this question since the battle ended. "Because, Ambassador, we're all facing the same enemy. The Silence doesn't distinguish between human and Vorthon, between Korthak and Zilithian. If we can't work together, we all die together." The debate that followed was heated but brief. The facts were simple. The Silence was real. It was coming. And only the Nemesis had proven capable of fighting it. Everything else was secondary to survival. But Jake could see the fear in their eyes. He had saved their lives, and in doing so, had become something they couldn't control or predict. The most powerful weapon in galactic history was in human hands, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. As the meeting broke up, Commander Thorne approached him privately. "Morrison, I need to ask you something. That weapon you used, the reality restructuring array, could it be used offensively?" The emergency meeting of the Galactic Council happened on the neutral station Harmony 7. It was 3 days after what historians would later call the first Silence incursion. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the great assembly hall, but all attention was on the humans and the ship that had saved them all. Jake stood before the assembly, flanked by Admiral Henderson and Dr. Carter. Behind them, on the main display, technical readouts from the battle played over and over. The numbers were staggering. Weapons that changed time, reality restructuring arrays, causality cannons. technologies that individually could reshape civilizations, all mounted on a single vessel. Ambassador Veltar rose to address the assembly. Despite having seen the ship's capabilities firsthand, his crystal features still showed disapproval. Honored delegates, we face an unprecedented situation. Humans possess a vessel that violates 17 major treaties and 12 fundamental laws of cosmic ethics. Yet this same vessel appears to be our only defense against a threat we didn't even know existed. Commander Zara Thorne of the Zilithians presented the analysis her people had conducted. Our deep space monitoring stations have now confirmed 43 instances of the energy signatures that precede silence incursions. The pattern suggests they've been testing our outer rim defenses for months, possibly years. The attack on the fleet was likely triggered by the temporal displacement event. A delegate from the Hivemind Collective spoke through their translation device. The question becomes, do we destroy the weapon and face this threat defenseless, or do we accept the risk of allowing such power to exist? Jake had spent the past 3 days preparing for this moment. Honored delegates, I propose a third option. The Nemesis has already indicated it's willing to accept modifications to its command structure. We could implement a system where the ship's weapons can only be activated with the unanimous consent of the Council's Security Committee. The reptilian Korthak representative hissed disapproval. And what happens when humanity decides they no longer need our consent? What prevents your species from taking the ship and conquering the galaxy? Dr. Carter stepped forward. Because, honored delegate, the ship won't let us. The Nemesis combat intelligence has already made it clear that its primary directive is the preservation of all sapient life. It's not loyal to humanity specifically. It's loyal to the mission it was created for. To demonstrate this point, NCI 001 had been given permission to address the assembly directly. The AI's voice came from speakers around the Great Hall, carrying that strange multi-layered quality that marked it as something beyond conventional programming. Delegates, I am not a weapon in the traditional sense. I am a guardian, created by a timeline where all of your species died because they could not set aside their fears and work together. My weapons are terrible, yes, but they are terrible in service of life, not death. The AI paused, and the displays around the chamber showed images from the future timeline. Dead worlds, empty systems, the final desperate battles. In the original timeline, humanity fell because they tried to fight alone. The Zilithians fell because their pride prevented them from accepting help. The Vorthons fell because they trusted too much in the stability of cosmic law. You all fell because you could not imagine a threat that existed outside your understanding of how the universe works. Veltar's crystal form flickered with what might have been uncertainty. How do we know this future can be prevented? What guarantee do we have that your presence here hasn't simply delayed the inevitable? None, NCI 001 replied honestly. But the alternative is certain death. I offer you a chance. Nothing more, nothing less. Admiral Henderson presented the technical proposal they had developed. The modification would involve integrating Council oversight directly into the ship's core systems. No weapons activation without unanimous consent from all major species representatives. Additionally, the ship would be stationed at a neutral location, crewed by volunteers from multiple species. The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. Species after species raised concerns about the precedent, about humanity's trustworthiness, about the dangers of temporal weapons. But always, the discussion returned to the same fundamental question. What alternative did they have? The ethereal, collective beings of pure energy who rarely involved themselves in physical politics finally provided the perspective that changed everything. Their representative spoke directly into the minds of all present. We have existed in this galaxy for 50,000 years. We have seen species rise and fall, empires bloom and crumble, but we have never sensed anything like the silence. They are not merely another form of life. They are the negation of existence itself. If such beings are truly spreading through the galaxy, then every philosophical debate about weapons and treaties becomes meaningless. There will be no one left to have such debates. The final vote was closer than Jake had hoped, but sufficient to proceed. 31 species voted to accept the modified Nemesis as a Council defense asset. 16 abstained. Only 3 voted against, and even they agreed to abide by the majority decision. The modifications took 6 months to implement. Engineers from a dozen species worked together to integrate Council oversight systems into the ship's core. The result was something unprecedented in galactic history, a weapon of ultimate power that could only be used with the consent of former enemies working together. Jake retained command of the ship, but his crew now included representatives from 8 different species. Amy Collins remained at tactical, but she worked alongside a Zilithian strategic coordinator and a hive mind combat analyst. Chief Kelly led an engineering team that included Vorthan crystal singers and ethereal energy shapers. The ship itself was moved to a position at the galaxy's edge, far from any inhabited systems but positioned to respond quickly to silence incursions. It became known as Guardian Station, protected by defensive platforms built by the Council's finest engineers. Jake stood on the observation deck of his transformed ship, looking out at the stars. In the 3 months since Guardian Station became operational, they had detected and stopped 4 silence incursions. Each victory had been hard won, and the enemy was clearly learning from each encounter. Dr. Carter joined him at the window, carrying a data pad with the latest analysis. The good news is that we're getting better at detecting them early. The bad news is that they're getting more sophisticated. The last group tried to infiltrate our dimension through subspace rather than direct rifts. Any word from the exploration fleets? Jake asked. The Andromedans have gone silent. No response to any communication attempts for 2 weeks. And Jake, the deep space monitors are picking up massive gravitational anomalies from that direction. Jake nodded grimly. The Andromeda Galaxy was humanity's closest galactic neighbor, home to dozens of spacefaring civilizations. If the silence had reached them, how long before they reach us? Carter checked her calculations. At current expansion rates, maybe 2 years. But if they're consuming entire galaxies to fuel their growth, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Jake activated the ship's communication system. NCI, what's our current combat readiness? All. Systems optimal, Commander. I have also been analyzing the data from our recent encounters. The silence entities are adapting faster than anticipated. Recommend immediate consultation with Council Strategic Command. As Jake prepared to contact Admiral Henderson, he reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, humanity had been the newcomers to galactic civilization, struggling to prove they belonged among the ancient species. Now they commanded the most powerful warship in known history, defending a galaxy that still viewed them with suspicion and fear. But perhaps that was what it took. Perhaps the greatest threats could only be faced by those who didn't yet know that certain things were impossible. The communication system activated, showing Admiral Henderson's face on the screen. Behind her, Jake could see the Council's new war room, filled with representatives from dozens of species working together. Guardian Station to command. We need to talk about Andromeda, and we need to talk about building more ships like this one. Henderson's response was immediate. Understood, Commander. Emergency session called. How many do you think we'll need? Jake looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in that vast darkness, the silence was spreading. Each victory bought them time, but time to do what? Build more impossible weapons? Find new ways to rewrite reality itself? All of them, Admiral. We're going to need all of them. But even as he said it, Jake wondered if it would be enough. The Nemesis was powerful beyond imagination, but the silence had consumed entire galaxies. They had faced this kind of resistance before and overcome it. The real question wasn't whether humanity could build enough weapons to win. The real question was whether the galaxy species could work together long enough to use them effectively. In the depths of the ship, NCI-001 was analyzing probability matrices and tactical scenarios. The AI had access to information from the original timeline, but this timeline was already different. Every choice, every battle, every alliance changed the possible outcomes. Commander, the AI spoke privately to Jake. I must inform you that our presence here has created temporal paradoxes that are beginning to